why, even when the majority of voters want change, the same people stay in power? It's not an accident, it's by design. It's called gerrymandering, and it's one of the most powerful tools used to suppress Black voters today. And if that wasn't enough, Congress is now pushing a new law, the SAVE Act, that could make it even harder for women and marginalized communities to vote. Let's talk about what's really going on and what it means for our democracy. Gerrymandering is when politicians manipulate voting district lines to secure political power. Instead of voters choosing their leaders, leaders choose their voters, ensuring their party wins no matter what. There are two main ways this happens. First, packing, where Black voters are crammed into one district, reducing their influence elsewhere. Second, cracking, where Black voters are split across multiple districts to dilute their voting power. The result? Underrepresentation, weaker political influence, and policies that ignore Black communities. For decades, gerrymandering has been used to silence Black voters. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 helped limit this practice, but after the Supreme Court gutted key protections in Shelby County v. Holder, states with histories of voter suppression were free to change their district maps without federal approval. Since then, we've seen states like Georgia, North Carolina, and Texas redraw maps that dilute Black voting power, despite Black populations growing in these areas. And this isn't just theory. Black communities feel the impact every election. When districts are gerrymandered, Black voters get less representation, fewer resources, and laws that don't reflect their needs. That brings us to the case of Alexander v. South Carolina State Conference of the NAACP. South Carolina had to redraw its congressional districts after the 2020 census to make sure each district had roughly the same number of voters. The issue? The first congressional district had 88,000 too many people, while the 6th district, the only district represented by a Black member of Congress, had lost almost the same amount. So what did the Republican-controlled legislature do? Instead of adjusting the lines fairly, they moved around 200,000 Black voters into different districts, chopped up Charleston County, and removed much of the city of Charleston from Congressional District 1, breaking a 120-year tradition of Charleston being the district's core. The result? Black voters lost power in Congressional District 1, making it harder for them to elect candidates who represent their interests. And that's exactly why this case ended up in the Supreme Court. Federal judges ruled the map was racially gerrymandered and unconstitutional, finding that the redistricting had resulted in the bleaching of African American voters from a district. But the legislature fought back and took the case to the Supreme Court. The Republican legislature argued that the redistricting was not racial, but partisan. They simply took a district that was marginally Republican and made it safe for the GOP. However, the state's NAACP argued that by primarily shifting Black voters, who also tend to lean Democratic, from the district, the move amounted to an illegal racial gerrymandering. In a highly unusual move, the Supreme Court not only overruled the lower federal courts, but basically restated the facts of the case to support their decision. This is significant. When a case is appealed, the appellate courts do not argue facts. They do not argue about evidence. They only consider whether the law was applied appropriately to the facts that have already been shown. Not only did the Supreme Court readjust the facts of the case, but they laid out additional restrictions on how racial gerrymandering cases are reviewed, making it harder to sue and get protection. The majority opinion also went on to say that when cases like these are reviewed, the court should assume the good faith of the legislatures. This sets a dangerous precedent, making it even easier to manipulate Black voting power nationwide. Gerrymandering is just one piece of a bigger problem: voter suppression. Since Shelby County v. Holder, states have passed laws that made it harder for Black voters to cast their ballots, like strict voter ID laws that disproportionately impact Black and Latino voters, purging voting rolls and removing registered voters without notice, and reducing early voting and closing polling places in Black neighborhoods. And now they're taking it even further with H.R. 22, the SAVE Act. The SAVE Act, also known as Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, sounds harmless, right? But in reality, it's another voter suppression tactic wrapped in election security language. H.R. 22 would require proof of citizenship to register to vote, something that millions of Americans, especially Black and Indigenous voters, don't have easy access to. Now, let's be clear. Non-citizens are already barred from voting in federal elections. So this bill isn't about preventing fraud. It's about making voter registration harder for eligible voters. Now let's talk about how this law could disproportionately affect women, especially Black women. Women are more likely to change their names due to marriage or divorce. If their name on their birth certificate doesn't match their ID, they could be denied the right to vote, even if they voted for years. Many women, especially low-income women and domestic violence survivors, don't have updated passports or driver's licenses. Under this law, they'd have to pay fees, go through legal hoops, or risk being denied at the polls. Black and Indigenous women are already underdocumented due to historical historical barriers to obtaining state-issued birth certificates. If H.R. 22 passes, many of them could lose their ability to register to vote. Even if women have the right documents, the fear and confusion created by this law could stop them from trying to vote altogether. And that is the goal, to make voting seem risky or complicated enough that people just stay home. Gerrymandering, voter suppression, the SAVE Act. These are just new ways to achieve an old goal, silencing Black voices and maintaining power. But history has shown that when we fight back, we win. We can challenge gerrymandering in court, push for stronger voter rights protections, and educate our communities on how to protect their right to vote. So check your voter registration now. Even if you think you're good, double check, because laws are changing fast. Head to naass.org/canivote and make sure you're still on the rolls. If this made you think twice about how elections are rigged before we even cast a vote, share this with someone who needs to hear it. The more we know, the harder it is for them to silence us. See you guys next week.